Welcome back to another edition of Letterboxd Highlights. In case you didn't already know, this is the series where I recap the best and most interesting films I've watched in the past 2 months. This time we're taking a look at both May and June of 2020. The first film I'm going to recommend to you is a bit less traditional than a lot of the stuff I've recommended in the past, in the sense that it is a concert film, and it goes by the name of Stop Making Sense, which was directed by Jonathan Demme, and he captures the a live performance of the band Talking Heads. I've never been a huge Talking Heads fan, but I've gone more into their music over the last couple of years because of the influence they've had on the artists I do actually enjoy. And I'd always heard good things about this film, but I was skeptical going in because with concert films, it feels like if you don't like the band, you're probably going to end up not liking the film. But there's something special about this piece in the sense that I've shot like concerts and live events in the past, and we tend to err on the side of caution and go for as much coverage as possible, which is a useful thing to do, because then when it comes to the edit, if like a camera operator messes up, you can just easily cut to a different shot and it's not an issue. But it doesn't feel like that was the intent with this piece, because I'm going to use that word again. Every shot in this film seems to have some intent to it. Demme's direction mixed with David Byrne's vision makes a truly exceptional marriage, and I wouldn't normally recommend a concert film, but this is truly exceptional. The next film I want to recommend to you is entitled Never Really, Sometimes Always, directed by Eliza Hittman, and it follows 2 teenage girls from rural Pennsylvania that travel to New York City to get medical help for an unintended pregnancy. And yeah, I don't have a whole lot to say about this apart from the fact that I really enjoyed it and appreciated it, and it's currently in my top 5 of the year, because I haven't got a top 10 yet. I really appreciated the visual style despite it not being overly flashy or groundbreaking. Sydney Flanagan is pretty exceptional in her role of Autumn, because she plays the character pretty subdued. She's not overly dramatic, but there is a level of brilliance to the performance, and there are certain moments where like that burst of emotion will mean a lot more from somebody who hasn't shown a whole lot. And on a whole, the film has a level of realism and authenticity that I really appreciate. So yeah, give this one a watch. So this is another film I don't have a lot to say about, but I think it's exceptional and I want to recommend it to you, and it is entitled Manchester by the Sea, directed by Kenneth Lonergan. It follows a depressed uncle who is forced to look after his teenage nephew after that boy's father dies. And yeah, this film, kind of in the same vein of Never Really, Sometimes Always, is kind of mundane and uneventful in a way. I mean, uneventful, there is a fucking big event, but it works in favor of this film because it's a really good examination of grief. It's not overly exaggerated like film tends to do with the subject of grief. Casey Affleck is perfect in his lead role. He really captures the pain that's on show, and this film is pretty beautiful in places. So yeah, I know that's not a lot to go on, but it's an exceptional film and you should definitely give it a watch. This recommendation is the most difficult one I've had to make so far, and it does come with a warning, which I will address in why I actually love this film. It's entitled Stalker, directed by Andrei Tarkovsky. It follows a guide who leads 2 men into a place called the Zone, where they look for a room that grants wishes. I gotta establish something first, because you need to know about Tarkovsky to know if you're gonna like this film or not. I've always heard that he was this magnificent director who makes these beautifully poetic films, but the one word that always came up is that they are slow. They are painfully slow, and Stalker seems to be the, I guess, embodiment of that. At least the start of the film is slow, and it's intentional. Tarkovsky has even mentioned that the start is as slow as it is because it needs to be for the rest of the film to hit as well as it does. There's something so weird about this film, and I don't mean weird in the sense that it's quirky, and I don't mean weird as in it's something that David Lynch would create. I mean it's weird in the sense that it feels like it does not want people to watch it. There are moments throughout where it seems to be questioning the audience about their desire to watch this. Do they care about this story and this zone and these questions that these characters have as much as the characters do? And I guess my answer was yes, because I stuck with it, and I'm glad I did, because this film is so deeply engrossing. Now, I'm not suggesting that I understood everything that this film is presenting. It's probably the opposite, but that should speak so highly of how good this film is that I don't care, that I was willing to stick with it even if I wasn't quite sure what I was seeing. And one of the reasons I did this is because it is so visually gorgeous. Like, from the sepia-toned mainland scenes to the dreamlike close-ups of the zone. It's one of the best looking films I've ever seen, and on the surface I could understand why people might not think that, but if you actually sit down and watch this, you will understand why Tarkovsky is as revered as he is. The last film I'm going to recommend from the month of May is entitled Thief, directed by Michael Mann, and the synopsis goes as follows. Coming closer to the dream of leading a normal life, a safecracker is asked to do one last job for the mafia, who have other plans for him. And I just love this. I'm going to mention the visual style again, but that's because that tends to be the thing that hooks me the most on a film, and then the story will take me the rest of the way. But it is stunning. Everything is kind of reflective. It's drenched in blues, and like everything's wet and stuff, dark and wet. And it's very much a style from the 70s, but it's one that I am smitten with. I will admit the ending to this is a bit of a tone shift and doesn't really fit with the rest of the film, but I love the rest of the film enough for it not to be a sticking point. In fact, it's quite fun. So yeah, Thief is great. The first film of June I want to recommend to you is one I didn't think I would end up enjoying as much as I did, especially when I saw the trailers in the cinemas, but that is A Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood by Marielle Heller. It's based on the real-life friendship between Fred Rogers and journalist Lloyd Vogel. And I gotta stay straight up, if you're looking for a film about Fred Rogers, this is not that film. You want to watch Won't You Be My Neighbor, the documentary for that. This is more about Lloyd Vogel and his journey and how Fred helped him with forgiveness in regards to his relationship with his father. I'm going to put this right at the start, and Matthew Rhys deserves a ton of credit for his portrayal of Lloyd and for carrying the film as its protagonist, because Tom Hanks is going to receive a lot of praise for his portrayal of Fred Rogers, and rightfully so, but he's not the lead of this film. Matthew Rhys is as Lloyd, and he deserves all the respect that comes with it. Whilst people stick together. I really appreciate how they frame a lot of the film as if it was an episode of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, so much so that they use miniatures and the sets as transitions and establishing shots of scenes. That stuff is like gorgeous. I do need to add, I think the film suffers a bit when it gets away from that framing device, but there's enough here that it's really enjoyable, and I was honestly caught by surprise at the surreal fever dream that Lloyd suffers from. That was probably the thing that won me over the most. BLINDSPOTTING, directed by Carlos Lopez Estrada, is about Colin, who has recently been released on probation, who begins to reevaluate his friendship with his volatile best friend. I'm not going to use this as a soapbox, because I think that the talking points and themes that this film tackles, such as privilege, systematic racism, and gentrification, is done so much more effectively in this film than I ever could do. So I don't want you to rely on my review for that. I just suggest that you go watch this film. I will say I really appreciate the tonal balance that this film strikes, because it's pretty funny throughout, but then there are certain scenes where you will stop breathing. Like, you will just stop breathing until some levity is provided to you, and I think that's an exceptional talent to have. On that note, I think it is a bit heavy-handed at times, especially in regards to its abstract scenes and the rapping throughout, but I think it works. The mileage will vary for other people. I have to give praise to David Diggs as Colin, who also raps under the name Clippin, which I found out after this, and I already listened to Clippin, so that's pretty cool. Who's pretty exceptional in his role, and his best friend Miles, played by Raphael Cassell, who is also pretty damn good. The two of them, the chemistry between them, it generally does feel like they've been lifelong friends, and that's something that's quite difficult to capture if you haven't known somebody for that long. So praise to both them and the director. This is an exceptional film that I'm kind of disappointed with myself for missing, because I had intended to watch this the year that it came out, but I turned a blind eye to it, and I'm regretting it because it's truly exceptional. The next recommendation I'm going to make is a bit strange because it's the third film in a series of films. And normally I wouldn't do that, but I think the films are separate enough that you could technically watch just this one without needing to have seen the previous two. Having said that, I'm not sure if this is a controversial opinion, but I prefer Day of the Dead to both Dawn of the Dead and Night of the Living Dead. I always see the most praise chucked on those two, but I just didn't really get on with them that well. Whereas this one I loved. I think it's because the performances are so hammy, it's wonderfully gory, the special effects deserve special credit. The narrative clicked with me better than the previous two because zombies in concept aren't that scary because they tend to be slow and lumbering and clumsy. So one zombie is like kind of scary and a horde is meant to be more scary, but it's scary because it represents something different. It's not just these creatures are going to eat our brain. Because they are slow, they kind of represent that slow crawl towards death that awaits us all. And that's pretty terrifying. But then you got to pair that with the selfish nature of humanity and knowing that you are trying to outrun death and you have to deal with people who are doing the same and don't care whether you live or die, and you create a nightmare scenario, and that's what this film has done. And I can understand people thinking that this is tonally all over the place, especially in regards to Bub the zombie, but I think it works because whereas our humans are selfish and they would happily kill each other, Bub is learning about the good parts of like humanity, which is culture and the arts. And yeah, it's a bit daft, a zombie learning about human nature, but I don't know. I haven't had an experience with this film in a long time, and I absolutely adored it. So the last two films I'm going to recommend to you share something in common in the sense that they are both pretty low budget films, and I love both of them for different reasons. The first of these is entitled Detour from the 1940s. It's directed by Edgar G. Ulmer and chance events trap hitchhiker Al Roberts in a tightening net of film noir trouble. This film is notable for its limitations. The rear projection work is painfully obvious, but wonderfully, I guess, endearing at the same time. Performances are pretty limited. You're stuck with kind of two characters that have fairly limited facial expressions and they kind of have to drive the whole film, and it is so reliant on basically non-stop narration and dialogue that I imagine some people might get tired. Luckily, it's a pretty short film. However, these things are what make this film so enjoyable. The narration is quintessentially film noir for me, like, you know, that dramatic, monotone voice. Dialogue is kind of quick-witted and constantly moving, just like our characters are constantly moving because they're taking a journey. Al Roberts is played by Tom Neal, who does a pretty good job, all things considering his limitations, but the real standout for me is Anne Savage as Vera, who just perfectly captures a truly evil and pretty intelligent, I guess, femme fatale. She's not really a femme fatale because she is trying to seduce him in places. But in regards to the actual technical aspects of this film, it wouldn't fly these days because even for low budget films, our expectations have risen so much because technology has improved so much. But there is something so wonderfully enjoyable about this film that I fell head over heels for it. So the second of our low budget films, and the last one I'm going to recommend to you, is the one that stuck with me the most despite it having the most issues, and that is entitled Primer, directed by the one and only Shane Carruth. The film presents as four friends / fledgling entrepreneurs who know that there's something more than the different error checking devices they've made wrestle over one of their new inventions. And this film should not work. There is so much wrong with it. The acting and dialogue is wooden as hell at times. It's front-loaded with jargon, like scientific jargon, which I think there's a level of accuracy to it, but I imagine it would drive some people insane because they don't know what the hell is being spoken about. And visually, this is one of the most shocking films I have ever seen. In places, it's so horribly grainy and noisy, and it's not intentional. I know it's not intentional. The color grade doesn't match between shots in the same scene, but when you read about Carruth's journey with this film and his journey in the industry in general, you start to overlook these aspects and understand why they're so endearing. And then you also realize that this film contains, narratively and conceptually, one of the best and most interesting portrayals of time travel I have ever seen. This film fucks with you. As I said, it fucks with you because it's almost impossible to know exactly what you're being presented with. You think you know what's happening, but you don't. I don't have the words to properly explain to you why this is as good as it is, because for a lot of people, I imagine they will look at the flaws, understandably so, and not stick with this. It is generally one of the most interesting films I have ever seen, and it has stuck with me ever since then. And Shane Carruth is such an interesting director, and his career, or lack thereof, is truly one of the biggest and most frustrating instances of studios and people with money not understanding what true talent and genuine ability is. It is so painfully frustrating, but we have Primer and his other film, Upstream Color, which I am going to get around to watching at some point. But for now, do yourself a favor, watch Primer, get past the things that you think make a film good, and focus on why that film is so damn good. And that will do it for this edition of Letterboxd Highlights. This is one of the more interesting episodes I've made because of the recommendations that are included. It's probably my most indie-rific and, in certain extents, the least accessible version, but these are the films that stuck with me the most. And I need you to know that both May and June, I watched at least a film a day. So that is 61 or 62 films over the space of 2 months, and I had to narrow that down to 10, and these are the 10 I chose. So that should show you just how good these 10 films are. So if you've seen them, please let me know in the comment section below, and we can have a conversation. If you haven't seen them, please do, and then come back and we can talk about them, because that's what this series is here for, to start a conversation and to provide recommendations that you may not get elsewhere. I know I sometimes recommend, popular stuff, but it's just things I enjoy, and I like sharing the things I enjoy with other people. Life is not going back to normal anytime soon, okay? There will be a sense of normalcy that is going to return slowly, and I just want to remind you, be cautious. You got to continue following the guidelines that are in place, so socially distance, wash your hands as much as possible, and if you've got one and you're able to, wear a mask, because they do help. We have studies now that back this up. Having said that, stay safe, and I will see you for the next edition of Letterboxd Highlights, which will be in September. Until then, stay safe and love film.